Mhm. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to our first in a three-part series on instructional design by the one, the only Dr. Jennifer Goode. She's going to share with us today. It's sort of a workshop, so we get extended time together. If you're watching this on a recording, don't be shy to sign up for sessions 2 and 3 without having viewed number 1. It would help if you went to number 1, but it's not, I think it's not cumulative from kindergarten, is it, Jennifer?
No.
Okay, so I just want to introduce Jennifer. If you don't know her, a lot of us have met her at her summits and at her other online STC presentations and at her various walks out in the world. I almost read that you're an adjunct professor, but that would have been last year's biography, which is still posted, by the way. So Jennifer comes to us with an extensive academic resume or CV, but she also now is in what would you call it, private practice?
Mm-hmm. Consulting, yeah.
Consulting, and lucky for us, she's going to share some of that with us. She's has nearly 20 years of experience in instructional design and CBT, computer-based training. She's served as a consultant. She's co-directed the world's oldest online master's program, woohoo, and taught as an online instructor. And we are very, very happy to have her. As I said, we're having this session in November. There'll be another session in January. Just check the ADDIE Eventbrite site. So without further ado, Jennifer, we need to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Vicki. Such a warm welcome. I appreciate that. And thanks to all of you guys who showed up on a Saturday to hang out and talk about instructional design. I knew immediately that we were kindred spirits when we got together. We're going to talk about instructional design on a Saturday. Thank you so much for the intro. And let me just tell you a little bit about what Vicki and I have cooked up for you guys. Is what we're kind of brainstorming earlier this year was how can we kind of create some synergy and some kind of in-depth learning around instructional design, but we wanted it to be approachable and we wanted it to be welcoming for folks who might not know anything about the field or who might just have heard it, or it's, you know, kind of gaining some traction in different areas. And so maybe they just heard about it and want to know more. So today, what your experience is kind of the kickoff to this conversation. So we're going to get everybody started and talk about on the baseline, what is instructional design? What do you mean by that? What kind of the work do you do? And then as our 3-part series unfolds, I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use as an instructional designer and some of the tools that you could use as you pivot into the field or as you develop and grow your own work in the field to make you a power player wherever you find yourselves. And people around you are going to go, wow, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about that. And I think as instructional designers, we all come with our own tool sets that have worked for us in the past. And I think that's what's marvelous about this community and what STC is built is that I come with my tool sets, but that does not mean that they are ubiquitous, all-encompassing, or the authoritative set of tools. There are many different ways to do a lot of this work, and different industries and different teams do it differently. And each of you bring your own experience to the field. And that's what I love. So as we're going through this, I do tend to like have a plan because I'm a planner. I'm going to have some slides because I'm, again, a planner. And so what I want to make sure is that we have a pathway, but I would love for you now that Vicki has trained us so well in raising our hands and getting on the microphone, we know how to engage with a platform. So I would love for you to just stop me and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, this is what we do. Did you think about that? And I'll be like, no, I'm so glad you're here. Tell us more. And so I just want this to be a conversation. Certainly not an end-all be-all expert on all things instructional design. I just love it. And so that's why I'm just here to talk about it and share with you and see if we can share some mutual love for this work and grow each other in the process. So let me go a little bit further. Here's what I'm thinking that we'll do today. And you tell me if this works for you, okay? So I thought we'd just start out with a baseline of talking about what is instructional design. The name gets thrown around. You see the acronym ID, like what are we talking about? So that we're all talking about the same thing. And then I'm going to share a little bit about the processes and tools and the people behind the work so that we can understand a little bit more about the industry, the field of practice. And then I know a lot of folks are particularly interested that I come in contact with transitioning their career from a technical writing side to instructional design. That's a natural pathway, especially for folks who are in STC with us, Society for Technical Communication, because we have a lot of writers, and then a lot of us get repositioned or reassigned or tacked onto new work that has some sort of instructional or training value. And so then we're left scratching our heads like, wait, did I just become an instructional designer? And that happens, right? It happens. And so I want to, no matter what your pathway is, I want to assure you that this is a natural pathway. You too can do this. And I want to hopefully highlight some synergies between technical writing and instructional design that for me, having an undergrad degree in technical communication with some emphasis on instructional design, how that kind of has been like a great pathway for me, a golden ticket, if you will, for creating my career. And so maybe you too can find value in that. And then, as promised, I'm going to start bringing some workshop material. Now, since we're laying the groundwork this time, I've got one big activity today. So we'll just do one, but we'll do some talking, and I've got some case studies and stories to tell. I'm a big storyteller. But I'm going to help us create a learner persona as I show you how easy it is to pivot from technical writing to instructional design. I think you're going to like the parallels there. So I hope this works for you. Vicki, I do want to check on time. Do we have until 3 p.m. Eastern? We do.
We do indeed.
Oh, yes, we're going to
There's
actually.
no requirement to go that long, but we definitely have that long.
Hey.
And we're getting together again in January, so we can just put a pin in wherever it is that we are.
I love it. If you guys need to drop off, no harm, no foul. Seriously, it's Saturday. But if you're able to stay for the whole time, I'd be delighted. It'll be fun, and we'll wrap up doing some little workshop activities. And I promise next time, since we'll all be aligned, we'll all know what we're talking about, I'll have more workshops because we're going to dig in to the next topic. So I'll talk about that towards the end. All right, let me just tell you, Vicki's already told you about me. I don't even know I have this slide. But I've been in L&D for over 20 years now. That's hard to believe. I've done lots of work from instructional design to technical writing. I've done a lot of needs assessment, which is where you go out and find out what people need before you start doing the work of instructional design. I actually have done a lot of learning measurement, where after the fact, we go back and say, okay, what did we accomplish? What are the numbers to prove it? And then I've done a ton of training. Like I stood up and trained lots of people in lots of different formats, technology, training, software training. And like I said, I've spent a stint in higher ed as well. So taught there as well. I started as a computer-based training designer working for the Air Force as a consultant with a company. And then I moved into different industries. I've worked in IT, tech, higher ed. A few years ago, I decided to take a break from consulting because it got pretty good and pretty exciting, but pretty time consuming. And as an independent contractor with young kiddos, it was a little bit more predictable for me to spend some time in higher ed and train the next generation of instructional designers, as I like to say. And so I've done that, and the time worked out right for me to return to consulting. And I just love being in business. I always will have an affinity for college students and higher ed, but I sure do like being back in industry. It just invigorates me, and I'm really enjoying it. What you just really need to know about me is I love learning. Like I don't stop. I'm just obsessed with learning. For better or for worse, it's a personality flaw, but it's also my superpower. So I like learning. And I think if you look at instructional design, you'll kind of see some of the things that are coming into play. Why do I love learning, you ask? I know you might not have, but let me just tell you anyways. Internally, It's personal growth for me. I love a challenge. I love something I need to figure out and solve. I have a better understanding of the people and the world around me when I grow and learn. But also I start picking those things apart and looking and peeling back layers and like looking for the systems that are in play. And what I start to realize is like, oh, well, that system over there is not operating independently. It's interacting with this system over here, and they're working like cogs of a wheel. And when you start looking at how the world is working around you, and you see these multi layers of cogs, you're like, well, if I pull this back and I pull this lever, then that's going to send that one forward in this direction. You start to see how so many things are interrelated. And that's a really important thing for me when I'm working with organizations, is to peel back those layers and try to see at a higher level what's influencing each thing. What's at play here? It's not just you and your training, like there's other things going on. And so what I do is I learn. I ask a lot of questions. I'm one of those, but what about? And tell me more about people. I'm going to just badger you with questions because I'm trying to learn as I gain that awareness of systems. I think empathy is huge. And so learning about people brings me a better awareness and helps me to grow in empathy for them and help to serve them. And it makes me a better problem solving. Like, okay, I see that this group needs help with this. How can I be assistance to them? How can I solve their problem? How can I lean into that? So that's what it does internally to me. That's what's playing around in this head. And then externally, well, it's great for professional development, right? When I learn, I usually get better at what I do. I help others, which is a huge personality focus for me. I love to solve problems externally, but I love to bring people together. I like to celebrate what we accomplished in teams and together. And learning does that. It helps us to realize that we can do something. We're powerful when we do things together. And so in order to bring people together, when we do learn and we grow and we empower change and we empower productivity and performance. So as you can see, this kind of fits for me, this whole field, and maybe some of this resonates with you. I wonder if by show of hands, just also to see if you guys are paying attention, does any of this resonate with you all? Do you all like to learn? Oh, awesome. I see Siobhan like, oh, you all are my people. That's what I mean. See, I mean, we just like to learn. We're here on Saturday learning. Why? Because you want to grow, you want to be empowered, you want to empower others. I love that. See, we can do that together. So if these things are true about you too, then obviously instructional design might also help you to grow and to unleash your superpower in learning in part of your professional career. So what is instructional design? Now, just saying this is not a textbook definition. It's not what anybody said. I'm just telling you in general what I consider it to be is creation. So we don't just accidentally have instructional design. We purposely create it. It's a targeted learning experience. We have a set of users or learners that we're really trying to shape, form, direct, or grow to help somebody perform a better on their job, to help them solve a problem, or to help them use a product, right? I think generally, if you look across definitions, and that's some of the work of academics. And so we've read a lot of definitions, but these are generally the things that we see, don't we? We see these trying to create these targeted learning experiences to help people accomplish something. So that's kind of where we're going to set off from today. Now, I promise this slide has the most text of any slide in the whole deck, and you'll never see it again. So I'm sorry for what this slide looks like, but we will move on. I promise it will burn into your soul, and then we will leave in reprieve. I promise. Okay.
Jennifer?
Yes. Oh, Kathy, yes, your hand is raised. Go
No
ahead.
problem. I'll just interrupt instead.
Yeah.
On the previous slide, when you're talking about the definition or your definition of instructional design,
Yeah.
this is kind of the hot dog thing again. What would you say is in this learning domain or teaching domain and is not instructional design?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to throw that to the people. What do you think is inside of instructional design? What's outside of instructional design?
I think delivery possibly. So teaching
Yeah,
Actually being the person presenting the information is not necessarily part of instructional design.
not necessarily. Yeah, so it depends on how you really focus in on it. I was vague with creation on purpose, right? Because it's the process, and I don't like to use the word process outside of academia. I think it's kind of overblown. But it is the creation, it is the culmination, it's all the work to make it happen. But if you look at instructional design models that are out there, and we're going to look at the most popular one today, just briefly. But ADDIE incorporates both implementation and evaluation, which are technically not design steps. But I would argue that you have to know they're coming in order to do the design stuff right. So, I love your question. I think we might could shift and make that your icebreaker question, Vicki.
Yeah. So I know from my experience, I'm designing pretty much all the time, in that I'm getting data, I'm adjusting the current reality, I'm creating a new vision. When I'm in a classroom, if I'm doing classroom teaching or online delivery like this, I am desperate for feedback from my students. How is it going? Are they engaged? Are they connected? Those kinds of things. Even when I'm doing like a technical editing thing, my objective is to transfer knowledge from the mothership to whoever is engaging with it, be they reading or listening or whatever. And I'm desperate for feedback from them also. It's continually a design. It's harder to get feedback from written material, but it's not impossible. So I just, anytime I'm trying to get someone to then get some information, I consider that to be the ID. Even if I'm sunsetting something, I'm still hoping that I can learn and then apply what I'm learning to the next project.
And I love Adele's input on the chat. She says, inside the format/delivery/system based on users, and then outside would be how you teach, maybe personality wise. I mean, that's an interesting division. I would also say it's also based on the context in the organization. You can be the lone instructional designer, and I have been that person, and you're responsible for it all. So there is no delineation. I mean, it's just like you pack your bags and you do every step of the, from the beginning to the end. If you have a huge team, then they may break each step down even into smaller steps, and you might have different people doing different types of design work. And then you really might just see instructional designers working just in design, and just creating the experience. So because you've already got a research team doing the front end, back end research at front, you've got an evaluation or measurement team working on the other side. You've got the trainers who are just the delivery mechanisms for whatever you design. You've got the development team who's all your programmers and designers, like graphic developers and things like that. So, I mean, it's possible. It's possible to narrow it down just to design, but I'm always careful because I don't know what context the clients are in and how big they have grown. But I think that's a great question, Kathy. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments? All right, back to the slide of apology. Okay, so here's the slide of apology. So I get into this because I want you to see something. If you're coming at this from a technical communication, technical writing background, I want you to see that we're not talking about anything that's radically different than what you do. We're just reframing it in a learning and a training and an instructional sense. So if we break down the term instructional design, instructional, we're focused on the learning, the learner, applying new knowledge. Guys, technical writers have already been doing this for decades. They're focused on audience members. They're focusing on bringing them new information that they can use. Like, this is nothing new. But what we are doing is calling it learning, and we're using some applied psychology and learning psychology to kind of make it even better. So we're going to say, okay, they receive information, they process it in a certain way, and then they apply it a new set of circumstances. We kind of already do that in instructional design, don't we? Or excuse me, in technical writing. But usually we apply or we deliver it instead of like in a written document. It's often done in training or targeted learning. And we usually have it for a specific purpose. I mean, a long time ago, technical writing, when I was entering the field, like, oh yeah, will you create instructional manuals? I'm like, that sounds amazing. I love instructional manuals. Like it was an early onset problem for me. But that was what I was already drawn to, is that notion of learning something new so that I can do something better on the back end. And we called it all technical writing. And so what it's just kind of evolved over time is like, okay, well, there's certainly something that separates this type of information from the other type of writing that we've done. And it's just that focus on the learner, the learning psychology. Now, design stuff is nothing new to you guys, because we're always proponents of strong, clear writing. We always love excellent visual components that bring the design home and explain things. We love to have a graphic illustration. We love enhancing experience through design elements. So we're not doing anything different in instructional design. We're just applying it to the learning experience and calling it a learning experience. So I just want you to see that we're not that far out of the bounds. And truly 20 years ago, we were calling this stuff technical writing. So don't be afraid if you're just getting into this. This is nothing that you can't accomplish. Do you guys agree with that? How's my audience feeling on this one? How's my team here feeling about this? I love it. I'm seeing thumbs up. I hear no strong objections. And I see some of you who are there, you know, you're like, yeah, we did used to call this technical writing. But now we just kind of, yeah, I see it. We did. It's nothing new. So what do we now produce? Now, if we delineate technical writing, like, well, that was technical writing, but how do we kind of lay claim over the products that we produce? We create things like instructions, user guides, checklists, procedures, guidelines, policy documents, training, e-learns, animations, infographics, communications. All of these can be learning based. They can help people learn new information and turn around and apply it on the job. And so when in my work as a consultant, I've created all of these. Like, these are just examples of things from my portfolio that I would have done over time. Like, I've developed these things, launched them for a client, now in order to help their employees or their customers or their clients do their work better, increase performance, make some sort of change. What kind of tools do we use? Another set of good news for technical writers, technical communicators, because we already do a lot of this. You're already using word processing. These are familiar friends to us. A lot of us are doing visual design. Maybe we're not doing interactive design, but let me tell you, it's easy to pick up. You can figure it out. It's not, oh my goodness, the software has come so far. I could tell you horror stories of when I started in computer-based training and what it is now as an e-learn and how much easier it is. If you stop me at the summit and let's talk about it, because I could tell you some war stories about how the industry has shifted. Media production, a lot of us already do some media production. Measurement analysis, we might use Excel or crunch data some other way. And then we use project planning a whole bunch, because these are huge projects oftentimes, and we have to use those project management principles and check things off lists and make sure all of our team members aligned on deadlines and due dates and milestones and tasks and everything else. So there's so much more that I could cover. But I also want to just say, you don't have to use all of these, because it has become so diversified. It's really hard to be a master of all of these trades. And so don't feel like you have to be an expert in all of them to get in this field. Don't let that hold you back. And so what you'll see throughout today is there's going to be so many different things that you can do with instructional design. And I would say jump into something that you feel passionate about, or you're like, that's easy to me. That's instructional design. I do that all the time. And then pivot from there. Don't feel like you have, I can't be an instructional designer. I can't apply for a structural job because I don't have everything on this list that she put up on the screen. It's not like that at all. There's a lot of niching down and a lot of specialization, and you're just getting started. So it's obviously a lot of fun, and you can do a lot of things, but you don't have to do everything. Does anybody else have anything that you would add to this list? I literally just put a couple of examples up for each one. Kathy.
Yes?
Oh, your hand.
Yeah.
Didn't know if
Oh,
you
did
had.
I not lower it? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Bobby, what would you say on this list?
Well, I just have a question
Oh,
about
yeah.
Figma, because it's a new tool that we're using at the company where I work, and our illustrators have just been exposed to that. Now, our illustrators support our screens and line drawings and so forth in our user documentation, but people are talking about this as an opportunity not only to develop workflows and that sort of thing, support the design of our user interfaces, but also to streamline the process of updating screens need to be delivered in our documentation. And then what also happens at our company is our training group, they mine our content for what will be used in training. So our team is not responsible for training. Our content feeds into it in a really dramatic way. Getting back to my question, Figma, that's a new tool on the landscape from what I understand. And I don't understand the scope of it. Is it when you say visual design, is this the interface design? Does it go beyond that?
I think that's a great question. And I've seen teams using it different ways. It can be creating the interface for an e-learn. Okay, so creating a mock-up of a layout for an e-learn, or it could be mocking up, elements for sure for a graphic or something, a complex drawing that's going to be created to live inside an e-learn or live on a wiki or live on a website or something like that. I have seen it used for mapping out processes. I did put it in the visual design because a lot of people who are using it are like product designers. And we see, I've seen a lot of folks using it to mock up samples of learning products that we're building. So that's where I've seen it most recently, but that doesn't mean it's not being used elsewhere. And it is new, it's completely new. And I have not used it extensively except for in the review meetings where our design teams have used it or built something with it. So I don't have to use it directly. This is another example, like you don't have to know everything on this list. But you can recognize the value that it brings and lead, the visual designers, if they bring that, then, oh, well, you're going to bring a Figma file. I know what that is. Let's talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Vicki.
Yeah, I have my hand up. One of the things I was thinking about as you were going over your list, something that's sort of newish, is the podcast, right? You've shared some of your podcast chops with us before, and how you were using it with students. I noticed the company, let's see, not my current company, but the company previous, they use podcasts quite a bit to get the word out. It was sort of the way that they made announcements that they wanted people to. And so that's definitely learning, and the design of that learning would be the podcast format. So
I love that.
I love the podcast format because it's conversational. There's a lot of energy in it. It's got audio, but it's not voiceover audio. It's, it's more fluid and engaging.
Yeah, and you can multitask, right? Usually in a podcast format. So you can be driving to work, doing the commute thing. You can be cleaning the house. You can do whatever and pop a podcast in and learn something. So a lot of companies have done that. And audio files are a great element inside of e-learns. You can download those and port them over to other devices. A lot of the videos are hosted by either YouTube or Vimeo or web servers. somewhere. So there's lots of little different pieces of media in here too. And I think that's a good call out. We can be creative here. That's the other thing is I love creating things. And so this taps into my creativity a lot. And that's the exciting thing. Marilee?
I would just add some type of learning management system, which is typically used in education. I've used that a lot, but Cornerstone and things like that, which may be used on for a regular. I should say just like a company might have that as well. And one of the things that some of the places that I've been involved with, they've also just used, let's see, okay, you're gonna have to help me, Vicki, here. There's just a content management system that they often use. What is it in Word? I lost the name of it. Not Word, but in Microsoft. Anyway, it's a.
You're not talking about SharePoint, the dreaded SharePoint that everyone
SharePoint,
loves.
yeah.
Okay.
I've even seen people use that. Thank you, the dreaded SharePoint. I love it. But sometimes that's what I use that at Intel, so it happens.
No, I think those are great call outs. Thank you so much for bringing them up. So the learning management system, LMS, is is similar to a content management system. It's a repository where things live and breathe that we've launched, the training that we've produced. And with something like CSOT or Cornerstone On Demand, that's one that you see a lot in industry. For instance, they would house all the courses, and then you could be assigned a certain set of courses or curriculum like annual training or sexual harassment prevention training or all the things, and they can just, with a click of a button, assign those, and you would get an email sent off that says you've been enrolled in this class, completed by this date. And so the learning management systems helps companies to roll out courses and curriculum, and then allows them to be tracked so that companies know that you've done what you're supposed to do. And for legal and regulatory purposes, we've done our due diligence. So there is a lot of coordination on the back end with rollout. And thank you for bringing that up in the conversation, Marilee. We do the same thing in higher ed. You'll see Moodle, you'll see D2L, Design to Learn, a few others that are out there. But there are several in higher ed that are out there, but same kind of thing. Enroll in the course, turn in your assignments, upload your feedback, get your grades, everything's done online in these little course websites. So certainly you can specialize in that as well. And there's lots of interesting things that you can do on the LMS side. I am trying to figure out if there's a way, a lot of the work that I've done in training creation has been for different audiences and in pulling in different user names or different content for different audiences. And so I've been wanting to merge and marry like content management systems that have all my database of official content, and then want it to pivot on certain content and then crank out the new training without having to recreate it 3 or 4 times. And I haven't figured out how to do that. I started researching it and found out that we can kind of back into it, but there's some coding and stuff, and I haven't had time to dig in. But like, that's a great opportunity. If you know how to do that, and you could, you can build a product or a process around that, because we're all the time having to create, like one company, but might have 4 versions of the same training, whether that be because of global position, like where the geographic regions that it pertains to or audiences or something like that. And then say, well, we need it to be called, instead of calling it North America, we need to call it European in this edition. And so some of the programs are harder to kind of customize that. You can't do like a search and replace when you're building these, unfortunately. But wouldn't it be great if we could like just suck data out of a content management system and then like put it into our instructional design system and then crank out the new training? These are the things I think about. Kathy's with me.
Well, I wanted to say that I am absolutely not a pro in instructional design space. I'm here at number 1 because I belong at number 1. But it sounds like it requires some variables, something operating like conditional text, and some tagging, and therefore coding probably.
I've done it in my documentation work, so I know it can be done.
Right.
But it's hacking it through the instructional design tools, and that's where I'm getting, you know, and I've been out onto all the user forums and the Reddits, and I've posted, and you know, it's kind of like crickets. Nobody's with me yet, but I'm sure with this group we can kind of make waves.
You might need a good coder to.
I might not be as strong in coding enough to do this, but I know it's possible because I know we do this in content work. So we're on the cusp. We're on the cusp of something big.
Well, it might be something like designing your content with more technical editing, technical writing products, and then you need a different process in your LMS to put it together on the fly or build it every day.
Yeah.
And we do that in software all the time, that you have today's changes are incorporated, or this is the Windows version and this is the Linux version or the Apple version, or
Yes.
so I think all those thought processes and paths are there. They just haven't been implemented in the LMS area.
Yes, see, opportunity abounds for tech writers. Like, you can see what value we bring to the space. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that as a mature tech writer, that I entered the field at a very fruitful moment when, you know, desktop publishing was blossoming and tech was exploding, and you could say technical and they would hop onto it to say, writer, are you a writer? But you look at this slide that we have here with all the tools, and throughout my career, which has not been hugely adventurous, you look at these ads and they say, must have 5 years of experience with X. And you're going, well, I only have 3 years, or I only used a version that was 2 years old, and I think these things are getting more narrowly defined now because there's such a plethora of tools available that when you're getting hired or reviewed, they really want you to know exactly the one that they have in place. But our real value is in our mindsets and our processes and our way of approaching and solving problems. And so if you have 3 of their 4 required, or you had it, but it's 2 years old or something, don't let that stop you from going ahead and trying to get through the HR screening process.
Yes, 1000%. Yes. I talk to clients all the time, and they're like, well, do you have access, or do you have experience with this LMS? And I'm like, I have been working with LMSs for 20 years. Every 2 years, the one I'm working on retires and it gets bought out, replaced, or sunk to the bottom of the sea by the next one. And they all work the same. They've been working the same essentially for years. You don't have to know what the latest greatest is. To your point, it's the way we think. It's the way we analyze. It's the way we process this. And so that's why it's just such a natural pivot, a natural tendency to come here, because you already see yourself in this stuff. Like, well, I've already been doing visual design and layout. I've already been doing the writing, the technical, and I do planning all the time. Yes, I do. That's just it. You are more equipped for this than you ever may have realized.
Because we can teach the tools. Tools are easy. It's the personality and the sort of the natural curiosity and the pulling things into individual parts and putting them back together. That's the stuff we bring. I want to not skip Adele's question or point in the chat, though. She wants to talk about microlearning being a new thing, sort of a amalgamation of pictures and videos and voice and text. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So we can get in. I just popped over here. I'm sorry, Adele. I had this buried back there, but I see it now, and I'm so glad you called this out. Micro learning, or micro learns, you'll hear people call it, are these short bursts of targeted information that we use to get out, solve a problem, and help people move on. And so probably the most accessible micro learns that you've experienced at this point might be something like YouTube. And I'm not talking about the 30-minute YouTube videos. I'm talking like the 2-minute ones. And you say, goodness, I know there's a way to take the page number off of Word and have it blank on the first page and start at page 2 on page 2. Like, I know that exists, but I can't remember how I did it. So you Google it or you YouTube search it, and it comes up with this quick little thing. This guy pops in and they're telling you how to do this. And you're like, that was it, I remember. And then you go about your business. Like, that's a micro learn. It's targeted for a specific purpose, for a specific problem, for an audience who's trying to apply it immediately. And what we're finding is that people like that just-in-time training, is what we call it. It's right there when we need it. So it's not that I went to training and I took all these courses on how to do Microsoft Word, and then one day I pull out my magic tool chest and I can do pagination. It is, I know enough about it to move on, but when I get stuck on a problem, I've got this database or this set of or series of resources that I can use to go find and solve the problem that I'm having right now. And I don't have to access it if I don't have a problem. And so micro learns are also good because they're as a society, we want that quick fix, right? We want that microwave solution, and we want it fast, and we want it searchable. We want it now. And so that is something that has served our population that has a waning attention span, like waiting through 30 minutes of Word training to try to find the 1 minute that's talking about pagination. Well, we don't have to do that now. We find it, we index it, we bookmark it, and we make it searchable. And so those micro learns are just in time and really good because you mix, like it points out, like pictures, videos, voice, text, just to kind of bring all that home. Marcy, I would love the idea of micro learning being the better version of help. I mean, micro learning is better than Clippy. Anything is better than Clippy, right? Our old pal from Microsoft. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a greater way to think about how do people encounter problems and how can we be there in the moment to solve them. And that's a strategy thinking. It's a strategic way of organizing our content. It's not a book, right? It's not a book. Bobby, I'm going to pop over to your comment. She was agreeing with our conversation earlier. As a hiring manager, she points out we often post idealized requirements, but what we really value is experience in similar tools and ability to pick up new tools and make sense of new content. Golden. Couldn't have said it better myself. Awesome. All right, I'm going to breeze through a couple of these slides here. If you're thinking about this, take a picture of it, screen cap of this. It might not be a position in instructional design or instructional designer role that you find. It might be called one of these other pieces. And as you specialize and niche down, you're like, I'm really into voiceover and scripts and sound editing. Well, then those digital editor, voiceover artists, those might be something more that you're in line with, but maybe you're a graphic or a visual person. So the animation designer, graphic designer works for you. So there's a lot of different kind of things here that are tied up in roles. And I'm only seeing those roles grow and diversify as huge learning teams are assimilated at some of these big corporations. And that's exciting because companies realize that if they unlock learning for their customers or clients, that's part of the user experience, that's part of the customer experience. And when you build that ease into your product, people come back for more. Think of what Apple has done, right? There's just that little card inside. And by following the instructions on that simple card, people are able to use their iPhones, back in the day, the iPods and everything just super quickly. It was easy to teach, easy to understand, part of the product design. Well, they see that also happening on the inside. If we can keep people trained and keep them learning and growing in their areas, they can respond and do better work more quickly and spin on a dime, really, as we adjust to the environment that we're working in. And so the same thing is going on. You know, we're trying to create highly motivated, highly empowered people to do their work and solve problems inside and outside organizations. So you see a lot of these names out there. And that's what's really exciting, is that we're really niching down, really specializing, and that's really growing the field in very dynamic ways. And I think that's cool. I think it's cool to watch. Great news, Career Outlook is very safe, very good, very strong. It's present in nearly every sector. I can't imagine one sector that's not. I haven't found one, but I put nearly in case there were anybody that's going to track me down and tell me that there doesn't exist somewhere. But nearly every industry, nearly every sector has instructional design work going on, continued growth, job growth over time, multiple career opportunities, just because there's a diversified field. Now you can just specialize in learning visualizations and those visual ops, and you can do learning visuals, and that can be your niche. And that's really cool. You've diversified within that field. Definitely potential for career and income growth over time. And it's greatly suitable to independent contracting and remote work, which is, I do both of those things now. And prior to working at university, I was doing that for about 7.5 years. So it's not just something new that's come out of COVID. It's been suitable for that type of work for quite some time. All right, let me just introduce this now. I'm going to give you a flag. Next time that I join you is in January, and we're going to go into ADDIE. But I couldn't talk about ADDIE, or couldn't talk about an overview of the field without at least introducing you to ADDIE and telling you a story about how I use it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about ADDIE. It's one of the premier models in our field. And so a lot of organizations will model their processes in this format or in this way, in this workflow. And so you might see it in job ads, you might hear about it in a job interview. And this is kind of like the standard workflow process, if you will. It is a process, it's cyclical, it goes on and on and on. But we do analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate. So I'm gonna walk you through that. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about one of my projects, some of my work, and talk about what we did in each step of ADDIE, so that you can kind of understand the process. And then next time when I come back, I'm going to bring you a workshop activity as we dive deeper into ADDIE and why it's so important. I'll bring you a workshop for each one of these letters. So we'll have 5 mini workshops within our next session. So come on back and let's talk in January. We'll meet on another Saturday and we'll see where we are from there and what we can do together. Okay, so during analyze, this is the first step we do. We have to really understand what we're working with. And you all know your wise technical writers, technical communicators, your team members who know you can't just go up based on surface ask. You have to go deeper, dive in and study. You need to know the problem, need to know the need, like who's asking for it. What is the outcome that we're trying to drive toward? That's an important question we're gonna get to next time. Who's the audience? What's their context? How are they encountering this problem and how can we help them solve it? So during this process, we might have a project plan. We might develop a concept document for our training initiative. We might have some audience or learner personas. We might have some baseline metrics saying this is how fast we're currently making our doohickeys and we're trying to get to this level of proficiency in making doohickeys, like all those things, right? And so I was a consultant. I was part of an independent consulting team who was helping the U.S. Air Force on this aircraft right here, which is called the E-4B. And so the E-4B is the 2nd largest plane in the United States Air Force. And so I was on the analysis team. I led the analysis team, and we went out to Offutt Air Force Base, and I got to do some work having to do with analyzing. And you think, well, why did they spend all the time taking you around on this plane? Yes, I did get to fly on the plane. I got to sit up in the cockpit. I did not fly the plane, just sat behind the pilots there. But I needed to see my audience doing their work, encountering the problems, and then obviously see how they're using the equipment to make it better. And so then I went back and I went to the design stage. And in the design stage, this is where we're saying, okay, we looked at everything. We know who we're working with. We know what problems they're encountering. And in the case of the Air Force, these folks were trying to train on this piece of equipment that you see on the screen here. And this equipment was highly technical. As you can see, it's brand new equipment that's being installed. But the area that was being trained in was about 3 feet deep by 4 feet wide. And in order to get a class into that, they needed to train about 30 people at a time. We couldn't fit anybody in that area. Like, it was not possible. Plus, if you think about this aircraft back here, I won't tell you how much this cost, but let me just say it's a lot of money. To ground this particular aircraft was an insane, inordinate amount of money. and it would take it off mission, and it was a crisis mission. And so we did not want this thing grounded and by a class who was touring and training on that piece of equipment. And so we had to create a solution that enabled the training to go into place. But if that did not ground the mission, did not keep the plane from being active and ready for mission, and created the space for all of our folks to be trained on it. And so the other thing is, if something breaks on this, it grounds the plane as well. So if you can imagine, if there's a whole bunch of people, classes coming on and off the plane and practicing with equipment, something's going to break. Like somebody's going to push something and it's going to bring the whole system down. And so we're another way that we're going to ground the mission, another way we're going to ground this piece of equipment, and we don't want to do that. So what we did is we came up with a computer-based training simulation, and we went back and we studied. I studied with my team how this piece of equipment worked, and then we went and reconstructed and rebuilt the whole thing using graphics. And so it created a simulation, kind of like what a flight simulator would be, right? But we did it with our new piece of equipment. And so this was my design work based on my analysis. I understood who we were working with, what the context was, what the problems were, why they were trying to learn to solve the problems in their work, and then brought the design up to meet those challenges. So this is where we're talking about, how are we going to deliver this? What kind of format? Use computer-based training. You think, why didn't you use web-based training? This is before Wi-Fi. Also, these folks sat on TDY, which is a fancy military term of saying, like, they sat in a schoolhouse and they couldn't have internet, so it had to be independent of that because they were on call, on duty, ready to deploy at any time. And we had to make sure our training could work in that scenario with or without internet. So we had to, this was back when we had to like put it on the computer. And that was specifically designed for their situation. We allowed them to make mistakes and break the system on the computer, which we couldn't do on the plane, but we wanted them to make those mistakes. We wanted them to have the self-correcting behavior and to learn from mistakes so they could do better the next time. So we built in feedback, and we built in, well, maybe you should think about doing it this way. So then we talked about graphics and layout and design, and all these pieces of design came together. We would storyboard it, which is just a fancy outline that uses some visual components, a script. We talked about layout, how we would interact, and with that logic would work, and then a flow chart of how they would flow through the training. So this is really kind of, you asked earlier, what part of design is instructional design? Like, this is technically the instructional design part. If you have a silo set of team members and one department takes care of each piece, this is technically the design, but I couldn't have done a good design if I didn't have the good analysis. And so the analysis is so important. So it was really great to be a part and lead the analysis team so that I could do good design and lead our design crew when we came back on site to go through this exercise. This is just an interesting photo because I needed you to see this. Like, when I was flying on this mission, we did a mid-air refueling, and that's a KC-10, or actually I think that might be a Jayhawk, but there's another refueling flight called a KC-10 where they shoot air fuel in midair to the nose of the next plane down. And I did training for another mid-air refueling unit called the KC-10. And this was very invigorating and exciting moment to be flying in the midair this close to another airplane. So I'm just pointing that out, that was very exciting. But then we bring everything back. So we take the design, we have all these maps, we have all these outlines, and we start building. This is where we record the audio, create the graphics, we create the e-learn. If it's a PowerPoint where we're going to stand up and give a slideshow, we develop the slide decks, we create the handouts, we make the infographics or the learning activities that we're going to do in the classroom. You might produce any of those things down below: audio files, graphics, handouts, those types of things. Instructional designers also do this work, but you can also outsource this. So you're like, well, I know what I want, but I'm really not a great designer. You can outsource it to vendors. There's lots of vendors who do this type of work for learning programs. Implement is the fourth piece to ADDIE. So we've got analyze, design, then we develop. Now we're going to implement. This is where we actually do the user testing, where we do some diversity, equity, inclusion testing or accessibility review, We might do some pilot testing. We might start the measurement process to see what kind of outcomes we're getting. We launch our comms. Congratulations, you've been enrolled in this training program. Please complete it by. We have the program officially launched, and then governance is something that's kind of interesting, especially if you live or work in an organization that has a lot of requirements or regulation requirements. Like, okay, if you don't take this training, it's mandated by federal law. What's the next step? You know, what are we going to do? Like, how does that escalation go? And at what point do we start taking off, you know, your access to the system until you complete the training, like all these things? But that you have to strategize with the right people, with HR, with legal, and all the teams that are involved in making sure that your governance structure is done correctly. And that's all tied up in implementation. Those are some of the production pieces that you might develop. And then finally, evaluation. If you're into numbers and analysis, you like to crunch numbers and show data, this might be for you. But you would track maybe your completion rates, your test results, if you have tests built in or quizzes. What are the performance outcomes, like 5 weeks, 5 months after the training? What are your performance outcomes? What are your badging statuses? So if you have a whole series, you know, you took all 12 of our courses, you got 12 badges plus a 13th for doing the whole series. You know, there's a lot of companies build culture around these badging programs. And then collecting data that helps to improve the program over time. So these are some of the things that you might be collecting if you're evaluating. All right, so those of you who've kind of seen ADDIE before, or maybe you haven't, any questions or comments as we've gone through ADDIE, ADDIE? We'll go into more, but I just wanted to at least briefly mention it to you because it's kind of cool. I see a lot of similarities myself with my work as a technical communicator and a technical writer. Like, I do something similar. Like, we analyze, then we outline or plan our documents, then we develop them, and then we go through revisioning, and then we do through launch and feedback. So I see a lot of this kind of wrapping up in that as well.
It's also very similar to the PMI project management flow. So,
and if you do any change management work, it's also similar to that as well. We can approach change, organizational change, the same way. Yeah, so nothing huge, like this is not earth shattering, but if you're going into an interview, it's good to talk the lingo. And so I like to drop some words in and vocabulary that'll make you look like a rock star, because I think y'all are all rock stars. Okay. So you might be thinking, okay, you convinced me, this is intriguing. How would I get started? So I come up with 3 ways to get started, like things that you could do now between our next conversation. So our first topic is just to read. Like I said, I love to read, I love to learn. Here are 3 books that are pretty widely known in the space and help you get interested in and attuned to learners, learning, and learning psychology. And so you can pick up one or all of these at the library. I don't have a kickback or a relationship with any of these authors. I'm just saying they're good and well recognized in the field. But I think learning and reading, and this one in particular, Julie Dirkson's book, Designed for How People Learn, is very conversational, very short, and very easy read. I have it on my bookshelf right behind me, but I'm not going to dig it out. It's really good. And my students in the past have really enjoyed that one. All right. The second thing is start observing. Like, start looking at training that you're assigned. Start looking at eLearn. Start looking at facilitators when you go to training sessions. Start reading those manuals a little more closely. Think about these kind of questions, like, what's working here? Why is it working so well? When are people most engaged, and why are they engaged? What is it that people are just loving? What's effective in driving performance, attitude, or skill? What's helping us to focus on those 3 things? What could be improved? Maybe you bring something that, or some perspective, and you're like, this could be way better if we just, like, those are important insights. Think about what tools are being used. Oh, they created that in PowerPoint. I've seen that before. Like, oh, they created that in fill in the blank. Like, start just acting like a little bit of a private eye when you're in your training and learning spaces, just in your everyday work. But I think observation and seeing what is already out there is a great place to start learning. And you can learn so much just by observing. And the last thing is to start creating. You can start jumping in on some of these really basic things that will help you become better at learning design, instructional design, but also give you artifacts for a portfolio if you want to start transitioning and interviewing to a job. So I said, a learner persona, a storyboard, a comms plan, these types of things that we probably already do, but maybe we call it something else. Like a storyboard is very close to a content outline for us writers. A learner persona is a lot like an audience analysis. Like, do what you do, but then package it, wrap it up in a bow for the ID audience. Like, that's just what we're just calling it what it is in a different world, and that different world is the ID world. You already know how to do it. We just need to craft it in that way that they're looking for. Think about how you bring your skill set. Remember, you bring value. The ID world is not complete without you. Bring that value on. How can I begin learning about learning? Think about what are some past examples that I could emulate? Like, I really liked that training. What was it that I liked so well about it? And then what documents could add to the ID process and work around me? In other words, what could I bring that's not there, that's missing? So these are 3 things that I think for if we had homework, because, old habits die hard. And I used to give a homework, but what could you do? These 3 things, start reading, start observing, and then start creating. Those are some great ways that you could take action today on what we've learned. And if you would give me just 20 more minutes of your time, we'll do a little activity, shall we? And if you don't want to do it today, I know it's Saturday, it's our day off typically for most of us. And you don't thinking there is going to be like a whole lot of assignments and work in here, like, that's cool. You can just observe. You can do this for homework, or you can just do it on your own time, or, lie awake at night and think about it when you're trying to fall asleep. It's a great insomniac cure. But you can think about some of these things. Let's work together and talk about what learner personas are. Like, that would be a fun thing that is related to some of the work that you've done in technical writing, and that we could easy pivot into a learner-centric document and turn it into something that would be valuable in the ID field. Sound good? Before we do this, does anybody have any questions or comments?
Yes.
Kathy, go ahead. Kathy? Uh-oh, we might have lost you. Okay, we'll come back.
Professional or a learner or something, and I start saying user persona instead of learner persona. Or, in a class.
Yeah, so I heard the tail end of your comment.
Let me do it again. So I'm taking notes and I keep writing user persona, the term that I've been exposed to for many years, instead of learner persona. And I can feel it just sitting there on the tip of my tongue. If I were to speak, I have to say it carefully right now while we're talking about it. So if I were in an ID environment and context and I started spewing user persona instead of learner persona, how much of a mark against someone is that?
Oh, that's a great question. And I hesitate to make any definitive claim on that, because some audiences, some organizations will be really forgiving. They understand that language, and others are like, what do you mean by that? We talk about learners. I think generally nowadays with the growth of UX and learner experience, LX, that has kind of become an awareness issue that has kind of bridged over and smoothed out between ID and UX and product design and marketing language and even writing. But I think if you explain it, if it did come up and you accidentally said user persona, I think they would be okay, especially if you told them what it was for. That would immediately connect the dots.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great. See, and I think that's just it. Like, we know what user personas are. They're like little audience snapshots, right? It's like these sets of audience descriptions that you can say, okay, we looked at your audience, we surveyed them, we put them into groups, and we've noticed that there's kind of some defining characteristics about each group that tells us a little bit more of the story of the audience that we're trying to reach. It's the same thing as a user, right? A user persona, it's a learner persona. But in this case, a learner persona, if you know how to do a user persona, this is going to be like, oh, I got it. I just got to tweak a few things. There's not much difference, but going back to that learning piece, the learning psychology, we're going to build off of some of those things and talk about specifically the learning experience. So what we're trying to do is create more meaningful learning experiences, things that really click and they're effective, and reach people where they are with the motivations that they have to knock down any barriers that they may have and get them through to that learning experience. So what is typically in them? There's all kinds, okay? These are just some typical things that I have seen as I've worked in learner personas. I did a quick Google search. These are not mine, but you can pull these up and look at images and find some really fine examples of what learner personas look like. So these are not actual ones for my clients. I didn't want to use any of those without permission. So here are some basics. You might have their job title or division, like these are our software engineers. This makes up 12% of our population that we're going to be training. What a typical software engineer does this type of work. And then the people who work in this role or typically work in this role have these general personality traits. They're very attentive to detail. They're very structured. They like a lot of focus, those types of things. If there is MBTI, Myers-Briggs, or other personality inventories, that's good to know. For instance, typically, if I have a software engineering team, I'm not going to bring them in and do a bunch of games. They don't respond well to that kind of training environment, right? Most of them are, and I'm not trying to put people in a pigeonhole or anything, but they're not extroverted, really interactive folks that want to do that and thrive on that and like to learn in that way. So we use these personality inventory styles to kind of help. And how do we get all this information? Remember, we've gone out and interviewed a handful from each group. And so we've got some direct quotes, and we might come across a couple that might be increasingly meaningful or impactful to convey how they like learning, what ways they learn best, how they prefer to learn, how they like to communicate or receive communication. And so we show some of those preferences, communication tools, what types of learning styles and tips for engaging me are there as a learner, what motivates me. If I'm in a software role, I just want to get back to my coding. But if I'm in a sales role, what motivates me is my quarterly sales numbers. If your training gets in my way or comes in fourth quarter while I'm trying to make my annual sales goals, I'm going to be really mad, right? So, those types of things and those motivations for different groups within the organization are important to communicate because they impact how our learners engage with our training. In a dilemma, what would I do? And it could be related to, if I have a problem, I go to my manager. If I have a problem, I file a ticket with the help desk. If I have a problem regarding this training, the software, then I would do a Google search. Like, what do they do when they run into problems? That's important to know. And irrelevant topics, what are the topics in the content of the training that are relevant to me? What are my challenges and barriers? And then something called a learning journey. In what way will I encounter this proposed learning experience? Like, this is going to be part of their annual mandatory training that rolls out every fall, or this is going to be the third in a series that is an optional training for folks who want to be managers. Like, what is the journey of how they get to this training and where they're going? And so we kind of map that in some sort of context of a curriculum or a job pathway, or what it is, how they get to this experience that we're about to design. So again, this is inside of analysis. This is one of the things that we would do if we were analyzing a situation. People say, we need training. And I say, oh, tell me more about that training you need. Who's your audience? And then I go out and I ask, survey, interview a whole bunch of people who are in the audience. I bring that data back. And then I've probably asked a lot of these types of questions. I start grouping that data. and I make a slideshow and it says we have basically 8 audience groups. And I show a slide for each audience group. The slides look maybe like some of the ones that I've shown you on the left. And that persona serves as a jumping off conversation point for how our design team designs the training solution to answer the initial problem. Does that make sense for everybody? I want to make sure that this is clear. So if you're all okay with it, give me a thumbs up or something. Awesome. Okay, so that's the context. This is the analysis. This is how we use this. This is where it falls. It's the very beginning, helps us to understand who our audience is, and it should be very similar, to that audience or user persona that you've done. Yes, an audience is passive while a learner is active. I love that.
Ooh,
That's one for the books. Y'all write that down. That's great, Marcia. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's your activity, or here's your challenge, or it can be your homework. We can do it however you want. But consider a recent training that you've been to, okay? Consider that there's a training that you've just been to and your training team has contacted you, said we're about to redesign the training. Now, this is going to be a little bit imagination inducing, because typically they would send an analysis team out and do some interviewing and try to make draw some conclusions based on the data they collect, like interviews, surveys, whatever. But we don't have time for that. So let's assume that you work in a group of similarly tasked or similarly role-based folks. Like I work in a technical communication or technical writing department, or I work in a graphic design group. Okay, so whatever your group is, assume that you are the one who is kind of assimilating this data based on what you know. And you've been asked to put together a persona for that group. Okay, how would you classify your team, your department, your role group in this format, in a learner persona, so that the designers could revamp the training? So your challenge in this assignment, in this workshop, is to create a persona slide that you could share with the design team that would be representative of your group that you selected, whoever that is, your team, your department, your role, and help them understand your preferences and general attitudes in relationship to the training content. So I'll put this back up here as another sample. This is a persona template that's out there. And you can see some of the things are the same. This one's not necessarily all learning based, but you can see how they formatted this. You can just do this in PowerPoint. And you can see the personality is there, the motivations are there, and it gives some basic information about that. A lot of times you'll see folks create a kind of avatar, like this is not a real person in the organization, but they talk about, this would be Toby. They would talk about Toby and talk about her work. And then in our design process, we're like, well, we have to make sure we address the Toby situation, or all the Tobys are going to think that. And you're like, you're right, we have to account for the Tobys. And so it becomes this tool for our design work that we can call out general feelings and preferences and motivations within our audience group and make sure that we're designing towards those. So this is just one other example or format that I wanted to show you. So I'll pull this back up. I want to ask you, because I know our time is short and I just do want to talk about some time for questions. What types of information, if you were talking about your group, what types of information would you share in relationship to some training or some training that's being redesigned? What do you think would be particularly helpful for people to know about your group? And I'll just open that up as a conversation starter for us today.
I have one.
Okay.
I like interactive training.
Yeah. So do you like to click things or do you like to talk to people?
To do something, not just sit and absorb, but it could be clicking, it could be interpersonal, but I think definitely a preference for some kind of active engagement.
I love that.
However the training can promote that.
I love that. Some of the things I've used for active learners, There's a branching philosophy in instructional design called action mapping, and it's by Kathy Morris. And they would provide a scenario, and you choose one or the other for better or for worse. And then that would go to another choice, and we tell the story, and then you choose one or the other. And I love it because it's good for training like ground mission military operations. And so it sets up different scenarios, and there's always a risk or a benefit. And those are incorporated in each of the scenarios. And I think something like that, really interactive, Bobby, I could see you going for. I've also done some like fill in the blank work. So if there is a really heavy duty content, is heavy, and it's like, well, we've got to get through this kind of meat content before we can get to any application, to keep that active and engaging. I've often done like almost like Mad Libs, if you will. Do you guys remember Mad Libs, where you fill in the blank and you listen for words? And so I'll do like a Mad Lib worksheet, and they can follow along and fill that out. So it keeps them thinking even when we have to get through all that dense content. So there's lots of different ways you can integrate into your design based on having an interactive learner in the population. Of course, talking and asking questions. That's an easy one too, if it's possible on your format. What else? What else do you think you guys would incorporate or would say on your learning persona?
We just had training at our office. I'm in a software development group for highly expert tools, but we belong to a huge company, and I'm the only writer associated with our group. And there are 40 plus other writers that are, part of my tribe. And so it's very different thinking about which of those groups I'm associating with. We just had training in the office for personality profiling, and the developers were sort of there because they had to be there. But by the time we got to actually talking about, it's only a group of 20 people, and we've been together for more than a decade. When you got to the point of actually talking about this person is this type and this is why, and do you agree, do you disagree, between the person who was actually being profiled and the people who were observing the profiling, that was the most engaging part for them, not the Lego game that we played or the little discursive sidelines that we got into. They're all high performing, get it done kind of people. And that was the part that they really got involved with, was the actual analysis of the result of the analysis of profiling. So I think it would be different if I was talking about my technical writing group rather than my development group.
But that is so enlightening for that group of roles, right? Like they just want to get in there and get it done. And so they didn't like the Lego activities. They just wanted to solve a problem. They're developers. Like that's their bread and butter. And
and part of it was that some of the results were surprising. And well, I guess the most surprising one, he agreed with it, but the rest of us thought, wow. And there were a couple others where it was not quite what maybe the group would have predicted. And that was where they really enjoyed getting into it and saying, oh, I see that this behavior really does reflect that sort of attitude or belief. And but the analysis, I think, is they like doing analysis.
Yeah, I did a team building retreat several years ago for an IT group, and it's kind of the same kind of thing. Of course, you have a lot of the things that you typically do in that, but the things that they really liked were when we created it. This was before they had lockout rooms, but do you remember, like the idea of a puzzle and putting it together? We created a data puzzle and buried some of the facts within the story for them, and they had to like solve it in teams, and they just ate that up. Forget the team building, like trust exercises. Like they were, it was a competitive environment, and they were loving it because they were doing what they do. And that ended up building the team even more than all the other things that were available. So never underestimate putting somebody in their genre, in their element to thrive. It's wondrous. That's a great idea. Vicky.
So we only have a couple of minutes, but I love a good story. I love a good story of a solution delivered. I think it's more interesting if the people in the room can tell their success stories. I recently did a training at my work about diversity language. And I had planned a whole lot of sort of, these are words that we can use instead of grandfather clause, that kind of thing. But before that, I wanted people to tell stories, and they filled up the whole 45 minutes that I was given it by telling stories. People talked about when they felt like they were on the outside looking in. And that was so powerful that all I had to do with the sort of the learning part of it was just give people the PDF. And then they talked about it in their chat. But the stories got people hooked. So.
Oh, that's awesome. And that's so powerful because they feel that personally. That's that empathy element that you put in that we mentioned earlier. What a great way to roll that out. Well, I see we are out of, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I think that's interesting too, because it gives you an opportunity when you make it personal, or it becomes personal like that people overcome what might be resistance to something like, oh, we're going to do DEI training. And once they actually get involved and are experiencing what it includes and that they actually are affected by it, they become participatory instead of resistant.
Yeah, and it's less punitive. Sometimes we use training as punishment, like, you people need to learn this thing, right? Don't give your passwords away and don't do this and all that stuff. And when we share stories, it's a whole lot. I think it's just a stronger message because it's oh, now I understand why I'm doing this. And I understand that this is not my punishment. This is going to help everyone.
It's relatable. It makes it relatable. That could be me. I could see myself in their shoes. I love that. Well, if you guys want to start building your portfolio, this activity would be a fabulous one to undertake. And you could come up with your own set of 5, 6, 7 slides that kind of summarize the different groups. And if you're able to go out and collect data and show that, that'd be fantastic. But that would be a great way to bulk up your portfolio if you're interested in instructional design. All right, so I'm going to bring you, like I said, 5 exercises next time. If you still want to know more, again, we gave 3 steps today: read, observe, and create IDE work. I gave you an example of something you could create today. You can read those books I mentioned, observe some things that are going on, go to training, read the manuals, see what people are doing, what's working, what's not. Definitely reach out, connect with instructional designers in your org or your network, join the IDL SIG. It's fabulous. Fabulous people in it. And then we've got 2 upcoming webinars in this series. One in January. I'm going to talk more deeply about ADDIE, and we're going to have 5 exercises to go through each one of those steps to bring them to life and give you yet more portfolio elements to put out there for future hires. And then we'll come back one more time and talk about ADDIE and find what might be skipped over and what might be missing and how to capitalize on that. So I'm going to uncover some untold stories and bring some extra value in there. In the meantime, I got my email up there, Jennifer@ADDIE, that's my consulting company, ADDIE.com, and I would love to hear from you in the meantime. But what a delightful audience and conversation this has been. Thank you for having and hosting STC and IDL. Vicky, you guys are fabulous, and I've enjoyed my time. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. This is the time where we turn on cameras and our microphones and we applaud. I just want to let you guys know that you will be getting an email from me probably within the next 48 hours. And it will have Jennifer's slides. I forgot to ask her for them, but now that I'm asking, I'm sure she'll say yes. That way we'll have the books, we'll have all of the resources, we'll have our assignment, and we'll have a way to contact Jennifer. And I hope that we're going to see all of your faces January 21st. If you enjoyed it today, bring a friend. I think I love groups of 7 because everyone sort of gets a chance to participate, but we could handle more. So, all right. So we're going to high five our cameras And we're gonna applaud Jennifer, and we're gonna look forward to getting together in January. So I'm gonna stop that recording.